Excellent. Thank you all for joining me. I'm actually going to pick up, if I may, with what Miles has just said, because it was so clear and concise and challenging for people on the panel. So why don't I start, because Equinor is such a big player in Norway, why don't I start with Equinor and ask whether you accept the basic premise of Miles's argument, which is if you are going to continue to explore for new sources of oil and gas, that means new quantities of carbon that will ultimately be put into the atmosphere. You cannot do that, given the clear science on where we're heading. You cannot do that without pouring investment and resources into the challenge of finding ways to clean carbon out of the atmosphere or keep it out of the atmosphere. Agreed?
Well, thank you for the question. And as you understand, my name is Siri Espelekindam, and I'm head of Operations North, and my office is in Harstad, not only 3 hours away from here. I would say maybe it's possible to do both. I've spent many years of my life working with CCS, so I have actually experience in it. I used to be head of renewables.
That's carbon capture and storage or
yes.
sequestration.
So I think the long experience we have on the Norwegian continental shelf, also up in north, both in the Norwegian Sea and the Barents Sea, we're actually doing a CCS from Wellstream at the Snøhvit field. We can use that in the future, and that's what we're planning to do as well, by working on that, and also on both the technology side, but also on the business cases. So I think the big challenge is not really the technology. If you look at CCS, is more on the business cases. You could store it. And we have a license to store it now, and we're very happy about that. This is a lot of the experience we can use on the geology, on the subsea, the drilling and well that we gained for years, also up here in the Arctic. So I think we have to work on that, but also continue with the more of the exploration. We still think there's room for oil and gas, and we still think there's room for oil and gas coming from the north. We've been working here for 40 years. We've run operations here for 20 years on the Norne field, Snøhvit 10 years, and we know how to work in the Arctic. And maybe this is more the workable Arctic. Yeah, and we are still exploring. We're still exploring.
Oh, we know you're still exploring.
And the Barents Sea.
Isn't the problem, to use an animal metaphor that Miles has already invited into this space, the problem is that you're continuing your exploration and extraction activities with the speed and agility of a rabbit, and you are pursuing CCS and other curative approaches to the carbon problem in the atmosphere with all the alacrity of a tortoise. That's the problem. Your focus is so much on bringing the wretched stuff out the ground, and it's not on solving the problem when you've extracted it.
But first, I just want to emphasize that what we're doing on the oil and gas, we're doing both in a responsible, sustainable manner.
No, but you can't just, there's no equivalence there. The absolute commitment and resource you invest in extraction isn't in doubt.
But
what is in doubt?
You also know this is a global competition. And we also know that we are producing this oil and gas in a cost-efficient manner, but also in a sustainable manner, if we compare globally. So I think the way we are working this more of a workable Arctic, also in totality on the Norwegian continental shelf or up in north, I think we could end up doing the both of it.
All right. Before I want Miles to come back, but before I think it's right that we hear from everybody on the panel. So, if I may, can I now hear from Lundin, from Kristin? Give us your perspective on that. I mean, tell me first of all, Equinor I know very well. Lundin I don't know quite so well. So give us a sense of what your activities are, and then a response to this conversation we're having.
Yeah, we haven't been on the Norwegian continental shelf for quite as long as Equinor, but we have been in the Barents since 2011. We've been operating in the North Sea since early 2000s. And we are true explorers at heart, and most commonly known for having discovered Johan Sverdrup. But we are now very, very active in the Barents, most notably taking a lot of new licenses in the recent licensing round. And we continue to develop technology both in terms of finding and extracting the resource in the best possible manner. And I think the question and challenge that was posed in the room is too big for one company to carry alone. I think this is something that the industry has to address together with the policymakers. And in Norwegian Oil and Gas, which are the organization that connects all the operators on the NCS, we work very hard at how setting high ambitions for how we operate, setting ambitious targets for where we are going to be in the future, and we are consistently overreaching. But
we're too big for one company, you say, and it's about the policy and political environment and context. So let me turn to Sigrid, if I may. Sigrid, welcome, and thank you for coming at fairly short notice. It's great to have you here because you represent, obviously, Troms County, and it's a very this active debate about whether or not to push on with fossil fuel exploration. Obviously, is relevant in this particular area, and therefore you have a feel for the politics of this. You know, where people's opinion is and where people see their interest, because obviously there's issues of jobs, there's issues of economic growth, but there's also the overarching issue of whether this fits with a sustainable climate policy. So for you as a regional, local politician, what's your take on the debate that we're having?
Well, thank you for inviting me on very short notice as well. But I think it's very important that us as regional politicians are included in this kind of debate, because, as you say, we are sort of feeling what the inhabitants in our areas are interested about. And of course, the climate change is absolutely something that people are much focused on in the debates. But as I also say, I mean, the Troms County Parliament has acknowledged that, or acknowledges that the oil and gas industry is also part of our industry in the future, also in this turning of societies into the green shift. But I would. What we are really interested about is of course the jobs, the people and the societies that these industries bring with them, and how they actually respond to those demands, and how they also are part of building societies, not just being there for a while, but active.
Right,
part.
so to be blunt about it, are you and your region very supportive of more exploration, more focus on the commercial and employment benefits of fossil fuel extraction?
Yeah, I'd say we are positive, but we also are putting weight on the industry for delivering when it comes to jobs, presence in our region, and of course the overall contributions to society. So we are a partner in, I'd say, and we also have North Norwegian Petroleum Council, consisting of the counties and the mayors in north of Norway. And
is it a cozy relationship between the local government and the private sector here, the fossil fuel industry?
I think we have a good debate. I wouldn't call it cozy. That's a wrong word.
Right. Okay. Well,
politics is very seldom.
Well, Valborg, we haven't heard from you yet, so now's time. You've been sitting next to your colleagues, if I can put it that way, in the private sector. Your company, explain the way you see this. I think everybody would agree, very complex and challenging relationship between trying to maximize your company's commercial prospects, but at the same time respecting what we now know to be the extraordinarily urgent climate challenge.
Well, for those of you who are not familiar with my company, Aker Solutions, we're having 177 years of industrial history, and it's all based on technology development and safe project execution. And for the last decade, we've been involved in oil and gas development as a contractor, and we're in 20 countries. performing major projects in Brazil, in Angola, in China, but of course also in Norway.
You're sort of servicing the oil.
We're servicing these operators.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
But as I said, the foundation is the technology development and the safe product execution. And in this context, I like to highlight that 20 years ago, we started developing technology for carbon capture. And we have our own proprietary technology for carbon capture. We are ready to deliver full-scale plants. We delivered a large test plant here in Norway, but right now we are working on a number of concept studies, not only in Norway, for carbon capture plants. As an
Thing is,
example.
I mean, sorry
and not
to
only
interrupt,
oil and gas, but
I-
also other industries.
Right. Well, what's wrong with this part of this industry? Because I remember going as a journalist to a place you probably have never heard of called Longannet in Scotland
Oh,
a
yes.
long time ago, where I forget who it was, but they'd set up some prototype carbon capture and storage facility, which they were so proud to show me, and I put my hard hat on and I walked all around it, and they told me, Stephen, this is the future. You are seeing one of the key solutions to our climate carbon emissions problem over the next 20, 30, 40 years. It closed down, it never got anywhere, it was certainly never commercialized. So when you tell me, oh, we've got prototypes and we're rolling them out, why should I believe that this is any different?
Well, the prototype was ours, so you're right.
that one.
And that prototype has been all over the world. And we are testing on various emissions, and it could be from waste energy to waste plants, cement plants, and so on. But we are ready to take the next step.
Well, okay, that's slightly different
But
from what I was reading into
we
what
need
you said.
someone. We need someone to invest.
Okay, so
You're a
Miles,
contractor.
Miles, you have now heard 3 different perspectives from the oil and gas industry, all telling us that they understand what you're saying, but they've got to press ahead because the world needs the energy. And by the way, we're very clean these days, and we're working on CCS solutions, even if we haven't quite got there yet. We've heard the political perspective from here in the north saying, we wouldn't call it a cozy relationship, but we need the jobs and we work with these people. Are you hearing stuff that addresses the points you made?
Let me leap to the defense of Equinor here. The 3 people I've met in my life who are probably most frustrated about the progress of CCS were 3 Norwegian engineers at a bar I met in Oslo shortly after the decision to close the Mongstad facility. These were really angry gentlemen, and they were devoting their lives to the development of this technology, and they were very frustrated at the lack of progress. So on a positive note, let me share another story about CCS. Unlike of all places, Australia, when the Gorgon gas field was discovered, it was one of these fields which is a mixture of gas and CO2. If they'd exploited it in the normal way, it would have become the largest source of CO2 in the southern hemisphere. A local politician said, that's a bad idea, we'll only license the gas field if you'll dispose of the CO2. And somebody who was involved in the negotiations told me, we thought about it for 5 minutes and said yes. If it's a licensing requirement of digging up the fossil carbon that you get rid of an increasing fraction of the CO2 that is generated by that fossil carbon, the industry will absolutely do it. In well below 2 degree scenarios, we are talking about sequestering between 10 and 20% of the CO2 that we dig up in the 2030s. At the moment, there's no way with the current rate of progress we'll anything close to that. If Equinor was told, we want you to be sequestering between 10 and 20% of the fossil carbon you dig up by the 2030s, would you be technically able to do it? And of course, if the same rule applied to every other fossil fuel extractor?
Oh, don't hold back. You answer. Don't wait for me.
As I said, I
Sorry, I
have
was
a
breaking the
previous experience, so I'm quite familiar with with TCM. So we had the
Yes.
test plant, but also we've had other plants as well. So I'm quite familiar with that. And I'm not sure if I know the engineers, but I probably should. But to answer the question, I think on the technical side, it's possible. I've said that. We already do. We've done it for 20 years on Sleipner. Quite familiar with this. But as I said, this is more of the logistics. It's a hard logistics-wise, but it's also generating a business case. So that's difficulties in actually doing this. So I'm not saying we should say no, but at the moment, that's the issues we have.
But if I just clarify,
no,
the
carry
point
on.
is that a world in which fossil fuel producers had to dispose of CO2 as a license for operating and continuing to produce fossil fuels, I suspect Equinor would come out a winner. you're probably you at the moment sequester about 0.4% of the CO2 you dig up, according to what I can find on the web. Okay, that doesn't sound like a lot when it needs to be 100% to stop the climate changing. On the other hand, 0.4% is, I think it's about 10 times your nearest competitor. So you're already ahead on that measure, but as I say, it's a race of tortoises. But the point is, it could easily become a very strong competitive advantage for Equinor in Norway if it was established that this is what has to happen if you're going to open up new fossil fuel reserves.
And the only people who are going to establish that are the political leaders who set the rules, basically. And obviously that isn't happening in Norway at the moment, isn't happening anywhere in the world at the moment. But your message is that if nations are serious about all the rhetorical commitments they make in Paris and elsewhere, then they're going to have to change. And you guys are going to have to adapt to that kind of regulatory regime, which insists that you do not just develop the technology, but then deliver on it in terms of actual capturing and storage and cleaning out the carbon. I mean, it's fascinating to bring you guys together. It's just that there seems to be a gap between what everybody agrees ought to happen and what is actually happening. And I don't know, how is that gap ever going to be closed? Any of you?
Yeah, I don't think it will make. I don't think it will help global emissions if we introduce a competitive disadvantage to an industry that emits 1.5 thousandths of global emissions. So I don't think, again, this is something that Norway can do on its own. Because it simply would kill an industry which is already at the forefront of technology development, energy efficiency, emission reductions. I mean, the bar is so high already in our part of the world that I don't think it would make.
Well, I'm inclined to agree with that. It can't just be Norway
exactly.
showing leadership and nobody else being required to follow.
And you may not even want to start with oil and gas. You may want to start with coal. To make a real difference, which has got twice the emissions of gas.
I want to switch the conversation in a minute because I don't want to just focus on this one element of the challenge facing fossil fuel exploration in the Arctic North. But Siri, you make your point and then I'll try and move on a bit.
Yes, just wanted to say that I think actually it's a very big gap, as you say, between what you claim is possible and what they claim is possible and etc. But I think actually also the industry should be happy that they are that the environmental and climate leaders, or they who know how this is changing, that they are bringing up this debate and actually pushing the industry in a very healthy direction. And also that's also from a politician's point of view, I think that's our job to balance between the different wishes and needs. So a close collaboration and a close dialogue between the industry and the scientists is very...
Yeah, well, that's why I think panel discussions like this are really interesting, where it's really direct and straightforward. And Miles doesn't really need me here, he can ask questions. But anyway, just before we get to audience questions, just a couple of other quick things I want to cover, and give me quick fire responses. One, the conversation we've just had, frankly, isn't so, it is about Arctic exploration, but it could be about new exploration anywhere. It's not an Arctic-specific issue, but there are a couple of Arctic-specific issues I want to get to. One is about whether you guys, with your enthusiasm for more exploration, particularly offshore, in what are, traditionally pretty dangerous waters, waters that have major weather issues, rough sea issues, all sorts of things. You want to push ahead with more exploration. In a post deep water horizon world, there is a grave suspicion in the rest of the world that isn't in the Arctic North about whether it makes much sense in the broader context of oil and gas and fossil fuels and decarbonization, whether we should really be focused so eagerly on, deep water drilling in very dangerous waters in the high north.
Yeah.
Any of you, I don't mind, feel free.
Okay, well, from an oil and gas contractor perspective, the Barents Sea really isn't that difficult. We see, waves, wind conditions even stronger in North Sea conditions. So this is, southern part of the Barents Sea is not particularly challenging. The water depth for Johan Castberg development, around 400 meters water depth, that's shallow water for us. We're in Brazil, we're in Angola, where we have over 2,000 meter water depth, and we can talk about minerals maybe.
Okay, so that's the Barents Sea. What about other, because they have Shell and others have looked at other parts of Arctic waters?
Just build on that. I think we've been both exploring and developing and producing in these areas for 20 and 10 years. I'd say 10 years for the Barents Sea. And this is not difficult waters, so it's not more harsh. Maybe because you can get some polar weathers, but there's even rougher weather further south. So this is not that difficult part. Of course, there's more remote areas, of course, in the northern part of the Barents Sea, and also even more harsh. But in the more workable Arctic that we are working now at the moment, this is workable. And I must say, HSC is always the fundament for everything we do. That's our first priority.
Yeah, no, I'm sure, but I mean, just imagine how awful you're going to feel, and God forbid it never happens, but if there is a terrible oil spill in the pristine waters of the Arctic, it's just a horrifying thought. Somehow it feels different from, I'm not saying, this is a difficult thing to say, but there are other parts of the world where offshore exploration takes place where you don't want to see an oil spill, but it wouldn't carry the same impact on a place which is deemed to be one of the last fairly pure, unspoiled, untouched by humanity places on Earth, which most of the Arctic is seen to be by the rest of the world. And you guys, imagine how it's going to look and feel if that ever happens. But you're prepared to run that risk.
Well, the Arctic isn't just one and the same, and I think you are repeating a misunderstanding, certainly about the Norwegian waters of Arctic opened for exploration. It's actually, I have a classic example from 2 years ago. We had a rig drilling in the North Sea, in the Norwegian Sea, and in the Eastern Barents, and we had no waiting on weather in the Barents. We had a bit in the North Sea, and we had a lot in the Norwegian Sea. So it's further from the market, it's darker, it's colder, yes, so that adds cost. But we have the same high operating standards as everywhere where we operate.
Okay, and the second quick point I wanted to have you respond to, anybody on the panel, is that about the discussions we've had throughout the last 2 days about what kind of development the Arctic North wants to see, and the degree to which, yes, there is a desire for jobs, good, well-paid jobs for local people, but there are issues about control. Where do the real profits go? Who's really in control of these businesses? What does this really mean for local people? Is the oil and gas industry, do you think, something that really is the best way forward for what is, ultimately a fairly sparsely populated region which has very strong traditions, which is very keen to retain its sense of identity and independence? Is big oil and big gas the best economic future?
Well, it's a part of the future. So I wouldn't say that there is no single industry in our region that you could call the best one. But what's really the best is the knowledge and the competence that people working in the oil and gas industry bring with them.
But would they you talk about the jobs and the expertise, but actually wouldn't a lot of the jobs go to people brought into the region from outside, because they would have the special skills and the expertise?
Well, some of them, of course, we have in Norway, and that goes for all of Norway, we have to import people from other countries to come and work for us. We are not that many people, and the lack of people in the north of Norway is really a challenge. But if we're going to sustain the lively societies that we think is important in Norway, to actually have people living all over the country, we need to have something to live of. And so you can't just say that, okay, a job is just a job. It is part of a society. And we always have to remember that our our job as living in the Arctic is also a part of actually
All right.
keeping people here.
And I know you three want to come back on that, but and maybe you'll have a chance. But I just want to, we're almost out of time. I want to quickly try and get a couple of questions in. So does anybody want to take this opportunity to talk oil and gas in the Arctic? Ma'am, you're very good at raising your hand because you've had a go before, but go on, have another go.
Hi, I'm an Italian journalist. Thanks for explaining so well that the emperor has no clothes. But my question is, it's not only this, to my point. If I've understood well, there's a report that says that it's not good, it's a high risk for Norwegian money to invest in Arctic exploration, exploitation of oil and gas, because it won't be competitive by 2050. That is the time for the investment to be well used. So it's risky for the Norwegian to use money in an industry that in a few years will be no more competitive. So that means to me that if the government goes on with these politics, it's betting on the fact that we are not competing with the 1.5 degree in climate. Like not only is saying something and doing something else, but it's also betting that is not working.
Yeah. I mean, would you like to address that? Just the economic underpinnings of that argument.
Very briefly, if we don't invest in CO2 disposal, then what you say is true. If we do invest in CO2 disposal, you just heard the answer. If this industry, collectively, if I can refer to you as such, were tasked with dealing with the problem, and you can do these things like extracting oil from the Barents Sea and say, oh yeah, it's easy, you'd solve it. But nobody's asking you to do it. That's the problem. The industry is just seen as a participant, as part of the problem, rather than as a large part of the solution. And the problem is the industry's owners are not pushing the industry, so the shareholders in the industry are not pushing the industry to protect the value of their assets by investing in CCS. That's what we need to see happen. We need to see the owners of the fossil fuel industry saying we are concerned that our fossil fuel assets may be devalued because of the climate change challenge, and therefore we need to invest in CCS in order to protect.
Because we're very under pressure time-wise, I just want one of you, if you wouldn't mind.
Just very shortly, I just want to, there's a perception that the drilling, exploration, and also project development in both the Norwegian Sea and the Barents Sea is very expensive. It's not, it's cost efficient. It's competitive, so I just need to clarify that. So
it's competitive with, I don't know, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait?
What I'm saying in a Norwegian context.
Well, yeah, but isn't the point that as we decarbonize, we're assuming that a lot of fossil fuels exploration that possibly could happen won't happen because, first of all, there'll be less demand and other energy sources will be utilized more and more. So the point would be that by 2050, the massive investments that you're planning to make in offshore in the north would not work. They wouldn't be viable anymore. So they only are viable if none of this futuristic hope we have for a decarbonized world comes off. That was her argument.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know if this is the answer to your question, but I certainly believe that oil and gas will be an important part of the energy mix for many years. However, this shouldn't prevent us from seeking new solutions. And my company, we are using our technology bases to develop new solutions like floating offshore wind and even fish farms for exposed areas, which you discussed earlier this morning.
Done fish farms,
yes.
Yeah.
So I think we need to take the advantage of the technology and the very strong focus on health, safety of our people, environmental, that we really have the highest standard in Norway and use this momentum to drive the development further on.
All right. So I promised you a question, but hold your thought, because we'll get to more questions in a minute. But we're just going to change panel at this moment, because I'm being a rubbish timekeeper. So we need to do a bit of panel management.